The crack of the bat echoed across the field as Wyatt's teammate connected with a fastball, sending it deep into left field. Holden Briscoe watched from the bleachers, his calloused hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 42, he learned to appreciate these moments, his son playing ball under the Friday night lights, the smell of cut grass mixing with concession stand hot dogs, the simple pleasure of watching Wyatt grow into the kind of young man who made him proud. "That's game," Holden said, standing as the home team celebrated their victory. Wyatt jogged over from the dugout, his uniform dirty, but his face bright with the satisfaction of a solid win. "Did you see that double I hit in the sixth?" Wyatt asked, shouldering his equipment bag. "Saw it. Clean contact, good eye on that outside pitch." Holden ruffled his son's sweaty hair. At 14, Wyatt was already showing signs of the height he'd inherited from Holden's side of the family. The kid was smart, too smarter than either of his parents had been at that age. They walked through the parking lot toward Holden's pickup truck, a well-maintained Ford that served him well in his HVAC business. The lot was emptying fast, parents eager to get their kids home on a school night. Holden dug his keys from his pocket, already thinking about the morning's jobs. Mrs. Patterson's air conditioner had been making that grinding noise again, and the Johnson place needed a full duct cleaning. "Dad, wait." Holden stopped, his hand on the driver's door handle. Something in Wyatt's voice made him turn around. His son stood 3 feet away, his face pale under the parking lot lights. "What's wrong? Let's take a cab." "Please, Dad. Trust me." Holden studied his son's expression. Wyatt wasn't the type to ask for rides when they had perfectly good transportation. The kid was practical like his father. "What's going on, Wyatt? I can't explain it right now. But please, just trust me." There was something in his son's eyes, a mixture of fear and certainty that Holden had never seen before. In his line of work, he learned to trust his instincts about mechanical problems before they became disasters. Sometimes a strange noise or an unusual vibration meant the difference between a simple repair and a catastrophic failure. Looking at Wyatt now, he felt that same intuitive pull. "All right, let's walk to the street and flag one down." They turned away from the truck and headed toward the main road. Wyatt stayed close to his side, glancing back at the parking lot every few steps. When they reached the corner, Holden pulled out his phone to call for a ride. "Dad, look." Holden turned to follow his son's gaze. A figure had emerged from behind a row of cars and was walking toward their truck. Even from this distance, he could see it was a man, medium build, wearing dark clothes. The stranger reached the Ford and tried the driver's door handle. "What the hell?" Holden started to move back toward the lot, but Wyatt grabbed his arm. "Don't. Just watch." The man by the truck looked around quickly, then produced something from his jacket. In the dim light, Holden couldn't make out what it was, but the stranger bent down by the front wheel for maybe 30 seconds before straightening up and walking away in the opposite direction. "Should we call the cops?" Wyatt asked. Before Holden could answer, the truck erupted in a ball of fire and twisted metal. The explosion was deafening, sending pieces of debris across the parking lot. Car alarms started wailing as the blast wave shattered windows in nearby vehicles. The few remaining people in the lot screamed and ran toward the street. Holden felt the heat on his face from 100 yards away. Where his truck had been, there was now a burning crater surrounded by scattered metal. The acrid smell of burning fuel and melted plastic filled the air. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Wyatt stood next to him, trembling but oddly calm. "Someone just tried to kill you, Dad." 20 minutes later, they sat in Marlene's kitchen while his sister poured coffee with shaking hands. The police had taken their statements, the fire department had extinguished what remained of the truck, and the parking lot looked like a war zone. Holden's mind kept replaying the moment the stranger had bent down by his vehicle. "You saved my life," he told Wyatt for the 3rd time. "I had to," his son replied. "I knew something was wrong." Marlene set the coffee cups on the table and sat down across from them. At 45, she was 3 years older than Holden and had always been the more cautious of the 2 siblings. "How did you know, honey?" she asked Wyatt. Wyatt looked at his father, then at his aunt. "Can I show you something? But you have to promise not to get mad." Holden felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Show me what?" "I was using Mom's laptop yesterday to work on my history paper. My computer's been acting up, and she said I could borrow hers. Wyatt paused, fidgeting with his coffee cup. I accidentally clicked on the wrong folder. What folder? Give me a second. Wyatt got up and went to Marlene's computer in the living room. He returned a few minutes later with a flash drive. I copied some files. I wasn't trying to spy, Dad. I saw my name in one of the documents, and I got curious. Holden's stomach tightened as Wyatt plugged the drive into Marlene's laptop and opened a folder labeled Documents. Inside were dozens of files with names like insurance info, schedule notes, and G messages. Open that one, Wyatt said, pointing to a file called Plan Details. Holden clicked on it, and a document appeared on screen. What he read made his blood turn to ice. Meeting with G tomorrow at 3. H usually gets back from Patterson job around 4:30. Friday game ends at 9. He always uses main parking lot. Need to confirm insurance policy is active before we proceed. Remember, make it look like an accident. What is this? Marlene whispered. Wyatt opened another file. There's more. The next document contained a series of email exchanges between Renee and someone identified only as G. The messages detailed Holden's work schedule, his daily routes, and his habits with disturbing precision. They discussed the best times and locations for what they called the event. In one message, Renee had written, "He's been tracking the mileage on his truck for tax purposes. I can tell you exactly what time he'll leave the game." She was planning this, Holden said, his voice barely audible. My own wife was planning to kill me. Marlene reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We need to call the police right now. No. The word came out harder than Holden intended. He looked at his sister's shocked face and forced himself to speak more calmly. Not yet. Holden, she tried to murder you. Tonight. And she thinks she succeeded. He closed the laptop and looked at Wyatt. You saved my life, son. But now we need to be smart about this. What do you mean? Holden stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the suburban street was quiet and normal, nothing like the chaos they'd left behind at the baseball field. If I'm supposed to be dead, then I need to stay dead for a while. At least until I understand what we're really dealing with. You can't be serious, Marlene said. I'm completely serious. He turned back to face them. Wyatt, how much more information is on that drive? A lot. There are messages going back months. And there's stuff about insurance policies and bank accounts. Good. We're going to need all of it. Holden sat back down and looked at his sister. Marlene, I need you to take care of Wyatt for a few days. Maybe a week. Dad, no. I want to help. You already helped. You saved my life. Now I need you to be safe while I figure out who else is involved in this. Wyatt's face flushed with anger. You can't just disappear. What about Mom? What about? Your mother just tried to blow me up in a parking lot, Holden said quietly. She's not your mother anymore. She's someone who was willing to kill your father for money. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marlene reached over and pulled Wyatt into a hug while he fought back tears. Holden felt something cold and final settle in his chest, a complete absence of the warmth he'd once felt when he thought about his wife. What are you going to do? Marlene asked. I'm going to find out who Jiz. I'm going to learn exactly how deep this goes. And then I'm going to make sure they pay for what they tried to do to my family. By midnight, Holden had made his preparations. He'd withdrawn $5,000 in cash from 3 different ATMs, using Marlene's car to avoid being seen. He'd purchased a cheap prepaid phone and destroyed his regular cell. He'd also visited a 24-hour pharmacy and bought hair dye, glasses, and a baseball cap in Marlene's guest bathroom. He studied his reflection as the dark brown dye changed his normally light hair to black. The glasses made him look older, more anonymous. With the cap pulled low, even people who knew him well might not recognize him at first glance. You look different, Wyatt said from the doorway. That's the idea. Holden turned to face his son. Are you going to be okay here? Are you really not going to call the police? Holden sat on the edge of the bathtub and motioned for Wyatt to join him. Listen to me carefully. Your mother took out a life insurance policy on me. She and this G person planned my death down to the minute. That level of planning doesn't happen overnight. So I need to know if there are other people involved. I need to know how long this has been going on. And I need evidence that will put them away for the rest of their lives. He put his hand on Wyatt's shoulder. If I call the police right now, They'll arrest Renee based on those emails. But G might get away. There might be other accomplices who never get caught. I can't let that happen. What if something happens to you? Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm supposed to be dead. Remember? That gives me an advantage. Holden stood and checked his appearance one more time. Besides, I'm good at staying invisible. 20 years of crawling through attics and basements teaches you how to move without being noticed. Wyatt managed a small smile. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. And I promise that when this is over, we're going to have a better life. A life without lies and betrayal. What about Mom? The question hung between them. Holden could see the confusion and hurt in his son's eyes, the desperate hope that somehow this was all a mistake, that the woman who'd raised him wasn't really capable of such evil. Your mother made her choice, Holden said finally. She chose money over family. She chose murder over marriage. Those aren't the kind of choices you come back from. I hate her. No, you don't. Not yet. But you will, and that's okay. Hate can be useful if you don't let it consume you. Holden hugged his son goodbye and walked out into the night. He'd rented a room at a budget motel on the other side of town, paying cash and using a fake name. It wasn't much, just a bed, a TV, and a view of a parking lot, but it would serve his purposes. He spread the contents of Wyatt's flash drive across the small table and began to read. By dawn, he had a clearer picture of his wife's betrayal. The emails with G went back 6 months. The life insurance policy had been taken out 8 months ago, with Holden's signature forged on the digital documents. Renee had been methodically planning his death while sleeping next to him every night, but there were gaps in the information references to phone calls and meetings that hadn't been documented. G remained a mystery, identified only by his initial and a few personal details mentioned in passing. He worked at a gym, drove a car he couldn't afford, and owed money to dangerous people. Holden made a list of every gym within 20 miles of their house. It was time to start hunting. The Atlas Fitness Center sat in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation office, its windows covered with posters advertising personal training sessions and weight loss programs. Holden sat in his rented Honda Civic, watching the morning crowd filter in and out of the gym. He'd been there for 2 hours, nursing a coffee and studying every male employee who matched the physical description he'd pieced together from Renee's messages. G was described as tall, muscular, and younger than you. Since Holden was 42, that narrowed it down significantly. The messages also mentioned that he drove a BMW and worked as a manager at T10:30 a.m. Holden's patience was rewarded. A man in his early 30s emerged from the gym's employee entrance, talking on his phone and gesturing animatedly. He was tall and lean, with the kind of muscle definition that came from spending more time in front of mirrors than actually working. His clothes were expensive designer jeans and a fitted polo shirt that probably cost more than Holden spent on clothes in 6 months. The man walked to a silver BMW sedan parked in the lot's premium spot. Even from a distance, Holden could see that the car was at least 5 years old, and there was rust beginning to show around the wheel wells. As the man got in and started the engine, it made a grinding noise that suggested deferred maintenance. Holden followed the BMW at a safe distance as it wound through suburban Atlanta traffic. The driver made several stops: a bank, a liquor store, and finally an apartment complex called Riverside Gardens. It was the kind of place that tried to look upscale with fancy landscaping, but couldn't hide the underlying cheapness of its construction. The man parked and hurried up the stairs to his second-floor apartment. Through the window of his own car, Holden could see him pacing back and forth while talking on his phone. Even without being able to hear the conversation, his body language suggested stress and anger. Holden drove to a gas station across the street and called the gym. Atlas Fitness, this is Jessica. Hi, I'm looking for information about personal training. I was hoping to speak with one of your managers. Sure, let me connect you with Griff. He's our general manager. Griff. The name clicked into place as Holden remembered a message where Renee had written, Griff says we need to be more careful about the timing. Actually, I'm running late for another appointment, Holden said. Could I get his full name? I want to ask for him specifically when I come in. Of course. That's Griff Kinley. He's here most days from 9 to 6. Holden thanked her and hung up. Now he had a name, a face, and an address. More importantly, he could see that Griff Kinley was a man under pressure. The kind of pressure that made people desperate and unpredictable. The next morning, Holden sat in a different car, a gray sedan he'd bought from a used lot using cash and fake identification outside the offices of Peachtree Life Insurance. According to the documents Wyatt had copied, this was where Renee had purchased the policy on his life that he'd spent the previous evening researching Griff Kinley online. The man's social media presence painted a picture of someone living beyond his means, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and frequent posts about cryptocurrency investments that had apparently gone bad. In one recent Facebook post, Griff had written, "Sometimes you have to take big risks to get big rewards. The house always wins unless you change the game." Now Holden needed to understand exactly how much money was at stake in their game. He called the insurance company using a voice distortion app on his prepaid phone. Peachtree Life Claims Department. "Hi, this is Agent Martinez with the Atlanta Police Department. I'm calling about a death claim that was filed yesterday for one of your policyholders." "What's the policy number?" Holden read the number from Renee's documents. "The deceased is listed as Holden Briscoe." "Let me pull that up." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Yes, I see it here. The claim was filed yesterday morning by the beneficiary. We've received the death certificate." Holden's jaw tightened. "What's the payout amount?" "For $100,000. The policy was purchased 8 months ago with a premium payment schedule that's current through next year." "Has the claim been approved?" "It's currently in our standard review process. All claims over $200,000 require a 10-day fraud screening before payout. But the documentation looks complete." Holden thanked the woman and ended the call. For $100,000. Enough money to pay off Griff's debts and give them both a comfortable start somewhere else. Enough money to make murder seem worthwhile to people who'd lost their moral compass. He drove to the HVAC supply warehouse where he'd been a customer for 15 years. Tony Riccardi, the owner, greeted him with the kind of warm handshake reserved for reliable contractors who paid their bills on time. "Holden, how's business?" "Good, Tony. Listen, I need a favor. I'm having some problems with my wife, and I think she might be trying to sell off my equipment while I'm working." Tony's expression grew serious. "What kind of problems?" "The divorce kind. I need to know if anyone's been asking around about buying HVAC tools or a work van. Maybe someone claiming to represent me." "Jesus, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me make some calls." 20 minutes later, Tony returned with information that made Holden's blood boil. 2 different dealers got calls yesterday from a woman claiming to be your business manager. She wanted quotes on buying your entire tool inventory and a van. Said you were liquidating everything due to an injury. Did she leave a name? "Renee Briscoe." She knew specific details about your equipment, so they figured it was legitimate. Holden thanked Tony and left the warehouse feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. While he was supposed to be lying dead in a morgue, his wife was already selling off the business he'd built over 2 decades. The calculated coldness of it was breathtaking. His phone buzzed with a text from Wyatt. "Found more files. Call me when you can." Holden met his son at a McDonald's halfway between the motel and Marlene's house. Wyatt slid into the booth across from him, carrying a manila folder and looking older than his 14 years. "You look different with the dark hair," Wyatt said. "Good different or bad different? Just different. Like you're someone else now." Maybe he was someone else. The man who trusted his wife and believed in the sanctity of his marriage had died in that parking lot explosion. What remained was someone harder and less forgiving. "What did you find?" Wyatt opened the folder and spread out printed copies of messages. "I went deeper into Mom's computer. There are chat logs going back 2 years. 2 years. Holden felt something cold spread through his chest. "She started complaining about you almost immediately after your promotion at the company. Look at this one." Wyatt pointed to a message dated 18 months earlier. "She told her friend Kelly that you were dead weight and that she was tired of carrying a burden." Holden read the message, his hands steady despite the rage building inside him. Renee had written, "Holden thinks providing for us is enough, but there's no passion anymore. No future. I feel like I'm stuck with someone who's given up on life. Kelly, I swear sometimes I think about what it would be like if he just disappeared." "There's more," Wyatt continued. "She was complaining about money constantly, even though your business was doing fine. She kept talking about wanting a fresh start and finding someone who could appreciate what she had to offer. When did she meet Griff? About 8 months ago. She joined Atlas Fitness, and he was her trainer. The first messages between them were just about workout schedules, but it changed fast. Wyatt showed him a series of messages between Renee and Griff that charted the progression of their relationship from professional to personal to criminal conspiracy. The early messages were flirtatious but innocent. Within 2 months, they were sleeping together. Within 4 months, they were planning Holden's death. "She never loved me," Holden said quietly. "Dad, no, it's okay. I need to see this clearly." He looked at his son across the table. "She married me because I was stable and reliable. When that stopped being enough, she found someone else. When even that wasn't enough, she decided to cash out." Wyatt's eyes filled with tears. "I heard her on the phone once. About 6 months ago. She was talking to someone. I think it was Griff, and she said I was too smart for my own good and that I asked too many questions." "What kind of questions?" "About why she was never home anymore. About why she was always on her phone. About why she seemed so angry all the time." Wyatt wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "She told whoever she was talking to that she couldn't wait to start over without all the baggage." Holden reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "You're not baggage, Wyatt. You're the best thing I've ever done with my life. What are we going to do? We're going to make sure they pay for what they try to do to us. And then we're going to start over somewhere new. Just the two of us." The attic access panel in Holden's own house was hidden behind the master bedroom closet, concealed by a false wall he'd installed during the home's renovation 3 years earlier. At 2 a.m., when the neighborhood was dark and quiet, he climbed through the space above his garage and made his way to the opening. The house was dark below, but he could hear voices coming from the living room. Low conversation mixed with the sound of the television. He lowered himself silently into the closet, his years of moving through tight spaces serving him well. Through the crack under the bedroom door, he could see light spilling in from the hallway. He opened the door just enough to slip through and moved toward the stairs, keeping to the edges of the hallway where the floorboards were less likely to creak. From the top of the stairs, he could see into the living room. Renee sat on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, while Griff paced back and forth in front of the fireplace. They were dressed casually, Renee in a silk robe that Holden had given her for Christmas, Griff in jeans and a t-shirt. "Should have heard from them by now," Griff was saying. "It's been 2 days. The police said they needed time to identify the body," Renee replied. "There wasn't much left after the explosion. What if something went wrong? What if he wasn't in the truck?" "He was in the truck. I saw him leave for the game, and Wyatt texted me when it was over. He always parks in the same spot." Holden pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed record. Every word they spoke was evidence that would put them away for life. "The insurance investigator called this morning," Renee continued. "Standard procedure for large claims. They'll release the money within a week. For $100,000, Griff said, stopping his pacing. "Minus what I owe Gordo. That gives us about $350 to start fresh." "What about the kid? What about him?" "Wyatt. He's not going to just disappear. He'll ask questions." Griff sat down next to Renee and put his arm around her. "We'll figure something out. Maybe boarding school. Maybe military academy. Once we have the money, we can make any problem go away. He's too smart. He notices things. Then we'll make sure he doesn't notice the wrong things." Holden gripped the recorder tighter, fighting the urge to walk down the stairs and confront them both. They were talking about his son like he was an inconvenience to be managed, a loose end to be tied up. "I never thought it would be this easy," Renee said, taking another sip of wine. 20 years of marriage, and it ends with a phone call from the police telling me my husband is dead. You don't feel bad about it. Why should I? He was holding us back. Both of us." She turned to face Griff directly. "You were stuck working at that gym, making barely enough to cover your car payment. I was stuck in a house with a man who thought changing air filters was the height of ambition. Now we're free. What if they catch us? They won't. Accidents happen all the time. Cars explode. People die. Insurance companies pay out millions every year for things like this." Griff stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Holden's truck had been parked just days before. "Gordo's getting impatient. He wants his money by Friday. He'll get it. Just keep him calm for a few more days. You don't understand what kind of man Gordo is. He doesn't do patience. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you borrowed money from a loan shark to invest in cryptocurrency. Their voices began to rise, and Holden decided he'd heard enough. He made his way back to the bedroom closet, replaced the attic panel, and climbed back through the space above the garage. By 3 a.m., he was back in his motel room, listening to the recording and planning his next move. He had their confession. He had evidence of the insurance fraud. He had everything he needed to destroy them both. But he wanted more than just legal justice. He wanted them to suffer the way they planned to make him and Wyatt suffer. It was time to start applying pressure. Gordo Mathis operated out of a used car lot on the south side of Atlanta, but his real business was lending money to people who couldn't get loans from legitimate sources. Holden had learned about him through careful inquiries in the kinds of bars where desperate men talked about their problems. From his car across the street, Holden watched Gordo's operation. The man himself was exactly what Central Casting would order for a mid-level criminal thick build. Expensive clothes that couldn't quite hide his rough edges, and the kind of dead eyes that came from years of hurting people for money. Two men stood with him in the lot, examining a BMW that looked suspiciously like Griff's car. Holden had been watching for 3 hours when Griff himself arrived, walking with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was in trouble. The conversation was brief and clearly heated. Gordo pointed at Griff, then at the BMW, then made a gesture across his throat that needed no translation. Griff's face went pale, and he held up his hands in a pleading gesture. When Griff left 20 minutes later, he was alone and shaking. His car made the same grinding noise, but now it seemed to match his mood, desperate and breaking down. Holden followed him to a liquor store, where Griff bought a bottle of bourbon and immediately opened it in the parking lot. He took 3 large swallows before getting back in his car. The apartment complex where Griff lived was quiet in the mid-afternoon heat. Holden parked where he could see the entrance to the building and settled in to wait. He didn't have to wait long. At 4:30, Griff's phone rang loud enough to be heard through his open window. Even from a distance, Holden could see the man's agitation as he answered. "Hello, baby. No, I'm fine. Just tired." A pause, then, "What do you mean? What did the investigators say? I thought you handled all that." Another pause, longer this time. Griff got out of his car and began pacing. "Renee, you need to calm down. The money will come through. These things take time." More pacing, more agitation. "No, I haven't talked to Gordo today. Why would I talk to Gordo?" Suddenly Griff stopped moving. His face went white. "What do you mean? They want more documentation." "What kind of documentation?" Holden couldn't hear Renee's side of the conversation, but whatever she was saying was making Griff increasingly frantic. "They can't deny the claim. The policy is valid. We made sure everything was perfect." Another long pause. Okay. I'll meet you tonight. We'll figure this out." Griff ended the call and immediately made another one. "Gordo, it's Griff. I need a few more days. There's been a complication with the insurance." No, it's not what you think. The money is coming. I just need..." The call ended abruptly. Griff stared at his phone for a moment, then hurled it against the brick wall of the building. It shattered into pieces. Holden smiled and started his car. The pressure was building exactly as he'd hoped. The coffee shop in Decatur was busy enough to provide cover for a private conversation, but not so crowded that they couldn't hear each other speak. Holden had found Melinda Quinn through an obituary search for Renee's first husband, David Quinn, who had died in a boating accident 3 years before Renee met Holden. Melinda was a thin woman in her 50s with graying hair and suspicious eyes. She studied Holden carefully before sitting down across from him. "You said on the phone that you were married to Renee," she said without preamble. "I am. Or was. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Holden had rehearsed this conversation carefully. He needed information, but he couldn't reveal too much about his own situation. "I have reason to believe that your brother's death wasn't an accident." Melinda's face hardened. "I've suspected that for years. But suspecting and proving are 2 different things." "Tell me what happened." "David and Renee went canoeing on Lake Lanier." She said they were celebrating their anniversary. The canoe capsized in the middle of the lake. She swam to shore. "He didn't. Was he a good swimmer?" "He was an excellent swimmer. He'd been on his high school swim team." He could hold his breath underwater for 3 minutes. Melinda wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if trying to warm them. The police said he probably hit his head when the canoe went over, but there was no evidence of that on his body. What did Renee say happened? She said he was trying to help her back into the canoe when it flipped again. She said she tried to save him, but the current was too strong. Melinda's voice carried years of accumulated bitterness. She collected his life insurance money and moved out of their house within 2 months. How much insurance? $250,000. He'd increased the policy just 6 months before he died. Holden felt ice forming in his stomach. Did she seem grief-stricken? That's the thing that always bothered me. She cried at the funeral, but it felt performed, like she was acting the part of the grieving widow. Melinda leaned forward. And there was something else. A few days after David died, I went to their house to help her with arrangements. She was on the phone with someone, and I heard her laugh. Actually laugh. When she saw me, she hung up immediately and started crying again. Did you ever find out who she was talking to? No, but about a month later, she started dating again. Said David would have wanted her to be happy, that he wouldn't want her to mourn forever. Holden thought about Renee's messages, her complaints about being stuck and wanting a fresh start. The pattern was becoming clear when Renee got tired of a relationship. She didn't just leave. She eliminated the problem permanently and collected payment for her trouble. There's something else, Melinda continued. About a year after David died, I hired a private investigator to look into his death. He found out that Renee had increased David's life insurance policy by forging his signature on the application. Did you go to the police? I tried. They said the insurance company had already investigated and found the policy valid. Without new evidence, they weren't willing to reopen the case. What happened to the private investigator? He died in a car accident 2 weeks after he gave me his report. Hit a tree on a straight stretch of highway in broad daylight. The police said he must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Holden sat back in his chair, processing the implications. Renee wasn't just an unfaithful wife who'd gotten desperate for money. She was a serial killer who used insurance fraud to finance her lifestyle changes. Why are you asking me these questions? Melinda asked. What's your connection to all this? Because I think she's done it again. To who? Holden met her eyes across the table. To me. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Holden sat in a rented office space with a view of the Peachtree Life Insurance building. He'd spent 3 days setting up his operation, multiple phones, a high-speed internet connection, and stacks of documents that would serve as ammunition in the war he was about to launch. The first call went to the insurance company's fraud investigation department. This is Detective Williams with the Atlanta Police Department, Holden said, using the voice distortion app to mask his identity. I'm calling to report suspected insurance fraud involving policy number 4472839B. What type of fraud are we looking at? The policyholder's signature was forged on the application. We have handwriting analysis that shows the signature doesn't match any of his other legal documents. We also have evidence that the beneficiary was involved in planning his death. Do you have documentation to support these claims? I'm emailing you the files now. You'll find copies of the forged application, authentic signature samples, and recorded conversations between the beneficiary and her accomplice discussing the murder. Holden sent the documents and ended the call. Within an hour, the insurance company would freeze the claim and launch a full investigation. The second call went to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's investigative reporting department. This is Sarah Martinez, came a woman's voice. Ms. Martinez, I have information about an insurance fraud scheme involving murder. Are you interested? I'm always interested in good stories. What do you have? A woman named Renee Briscoe filed a $400,000 life insurance claim on her husband after he died in a car bombing. But the husband's still alive, and we have recordings of her planning the murder with her boyfriend. There was a pause. This is a hoax, right? I'm emailing you audio files and documents right now. The husband faked his death to gather evidence against his wife and her accomplice. It's the kind of story that wins awards. The third call was the most delicate. Holden had spent 2 days learning about Gordo Mathis's operation, including the fact that he was always looking for new ways to collect on outstanding debts. Gordo's auto sales. Mr. Mathis, my name is Frank Morrison. I represent a client who has information about Griff Kinley. Who's asking? Someone who knows that Mr. Kinley owes you a substantial amount of money, and someone who knows that he's about to receive a large insurance payout. There was a pause. How large? For $100,000. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? The insurance company is investigating the claim. It looks like the whole thing might be fraudulent. If they deny the payout, Mr. Kinley won't have any money to pay you. When's this supposed to happen? The investigation starts today. If I were you, I'd collect what I could before the news gets out. Holden ended the call and sat back in his chair. He'd just lit 3 separate fuses, each one designed to explode in Renee and Griff's faces at precisely the right moment. Now he had to wait for the chaos to begin. He didn't have to wait long. At 10 a.m., his surveillance equipment picked up Renee's phone conversation with the insurance company. What do you mean, under investigation? She was saying. The claim was approved. You said it was just a formality. The insurance representative's voice was calm but firm. Ma'am, we've received information suggesting that the application contains forged signatures and that the death may not have been accidental. We're required by law to investigate these allegations thoroughly. That's ridiculous. My husband died in a car explosion. There were witnesses. We understand this is frustrating, but the investigation will proceed. You'll be notified when we have more information. The call ended, and immediately Renee's phone rang again. Griff, we have a problem. By noon, Gordo Mathis had paid Griff Kinley a visit at the gym. Holden watched from across the street as 2 large men escorted Griff to a black SUV in a parking lot. Even from a distance, he could see that the conversation was not going well for Griff. The gym security cameras would later show Griff being shoved against the vehicle, while Gordo explained exactly what would happen if his money wasn't paid by the end of the week. When they released him, Griff collapsed to his knees in the parking lot, holding his ribs and gasping for T2 p.m. Griff showed up at Renee's house driving a car that Holden didn't recognize. Apparently his BMW had been repossessed. His face was bruised, and he moved like a man who'd been worked over by professionals. Holden positioned himself in the bushes behind the house, close enough to hear their conversation through the open kitchen window. They took my car, Griff said without preamble. Gordo's people grabbed me outside the gym and beat the hell out of me. They want their money by Friday, or they're going to start breaking bones. The insurance company froze the claim, Renee replied. They're investigating fraud allegations. What kind of allegations? They think the policy was forged. They think Holden's death wasn't an accident. How is that possible? Nobody knows anything. We were careful. Someone knows something. The question is who? Griff began pacing around the kitchen, his agitation growing with each step. This is a disaster. If I don't pay Gordo, I'm dead. If the insurance doesn't pay out, I can't pay Gordo. And if they investigate the bombing, calm down. We can figure this out. Calm down. Renee, we murdered your husband. If they catch us, we're looking at life in prison. Keep your voice down. Who cares? The neighbors already think you're a grieving widow. What are they going to think when they find out you blew up your own husband for insurance money? Renee's voice turned cold. Maybe you should have thought about that before you got yourself into debt with criminals. I got into debt trying to build a future for us. Every investment I made was for both of us. Every investment you made was stupid. Cryptocurrency, day trading, sports betting. You threw away money on get-rich-quick schemes like a child. At least I was trying. You were just sitting around complaining about how boring your life was. My life was boring because my husband was boring. 20 years of fixing air conditioners and watching television. Do you know what it's like to be married to someone with no ambition? Holden listened to them tear each other apart, feeling a cold satisfaction at how quickly their partnership was dissolving under pressure. When criminals fell out with each other, they usually did most of the work of destroying themselves. The argument escalated until Griff grabbed a kitchen chair and threw it across the room. It hit the refrigerator with a crash that could be heard throughout the house. You lied to me, he shouted. You said this would be easy. You said nobody would ever suspect anything. It was easy until you started panicking and drawing attention. I'm not panicking. I'm being realistic. We committed murder, Renee. People go to the electric chair for that. Georgia uses lethal injection now. That's not funny. I wasn't trying to be funny. I was pointing out that you're being dramatic. Griff stared at her for a long moment. You're a sociopath. I'm a pragmatist. There's a difference. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to turn myself in. No, you're not. Yes, I am. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for Gordo's people. Renee walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a butcher knife. You're not turning yourself in, Griff. Because if you do, I'll tell them that you planned the whole thing. I'll tell them that you threatened to kill me if I didn't help you murder my husband. They'll never believe that, won't they? You're the one with gambling debts. You're the one who needed money. I'm just a grieving widow who was manipulated by her husband's killer. Griff backed toward the door, his eyes fixed on the knife in Renee's hand. You're insane. I'm adaptable. It's kept me alive this long. He turned and ran from the house, leaving the front door open behind him. Renee stood in the kitchen for a moment, still holding the knife, before carefully placing it back in the drawer. Holden had heard enough. Phase 2 of his plan was ready to begin. The next morning, Renee found an envelope taped to her front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line typed in the center. You buried the wrong man. Attached to the paper were photographed surveillance shots of her and Griff together, copies of their text messages, and a printout of the insurance company's denial letter. At the bottom of the page was the business card of Detective Morrison, the investigator assigned to her case. That Renee's hands shook as she read the denial letter. The insurance company had not only frozen her claim, but had forwarded their findings to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The evidence against her was overwhelming: forged signatures, motive, opportunity, and recorded confessions. She tried calling Griff, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried calling the insurance company, but they refused to discuss the case with her anymore. She tried calling a lawyer, but the 3 attorneys she contacted all declined to represent her once they heard the details of her situation. By afternoon, the news media had picked up the story. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called requesting comment on the insurance fraud murder plot. A television news crew set up outside her house, broadcasting live updates about the suburban housewife who had allegedly killed her husband for money. The neighbors who had brought casseroles and flowers to console her in her grief now crossed the street to avoid her. The mailman refused to deliver mail to her door. Someone had spray-painted "murderer" across her garage door in red letters. At 6 p.m., a convoy of police cars arrived at the house. Detective Morrison emerged from the lead vehicle carrying an arrest warrant and a search warrant. Behind him came crime scene technicians, forensic specialists, and federal agents from the Insurance Fraud Task Force. Renee watched from her living room window as they surrounded the house. She could have run, but where would she go? Her bank accounts were frozen. Her car was registered in her name. Her face was on the evening news. The doorbell rang, followed by a loud knock. Renee Briscoe, this is the Atlanta Police Department. We have a warrant for your arrest. She opened the door and found herself facing a dozen law enforcement officers. Detective Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs. Renee Briscoe, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the attempted murder of Holden Briscoe. You have the right to remain silent. The Fulton County Courthouse was packed for Renee's arraignment. Media outlets from across the Southeast had sent reporters to cover the story of the suburban housewife who had tried to kill her husband for insurance money. Holden sat in the back row, wearing his glasses and baseball cap, watching his wife of 20 years face charges that would put her away for life. Griff had been arrested the same day as Renee, picked up at the bus station while trying to leave town. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a death sentence, he had immediately agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal. During the preliminary hearing, the prosecution laid out their case with devastating efficiency. They played recordings of Renee and Griff planning the murder. They showed evidence of the forged insurance documents. They demonstrated how Renee had researched her husband's schedule and routines to plan the bombing. Griff's testimony was particularly damaging. Under oath, he described how Renee had approached him with the idea of killing her husband for money. He testified that she had handled all the insurance arrangements and had provided detailed information about Holden's movements. He claimed that she had threatened to kill him if he backed out of the plan. She told me she'd done this before, Griff said from the witness stand. She said her first husband had been an accident, but that she'd learned from that experience. She said she knew how to make it look like an accident and how to avoid getting caught. Renee's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of Griff's manipulation, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury heard recordings of her laughing about Holden's death and discussing how to spend the insurance money. They saw emails where she had provided detailed information about her husband's schedule and habits. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Wyatt testified about finding the incriminating files on his mother's computer and about overhearing her phone conversations. Melinda Quinn testified about the suspicious death of Renee's first husband and the pattern of behavior that suggested a serial killer. During her closing argument, the prosecutor addressed the jury with quiet intensity. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about a crime of passion here. We're not talking about someone who snapped in a moment of anger or desperation. We're talking about a woman who planned her husband's murder for months, who forged legal documents, who manipulated a younger man into participating in her scheme, and who showed no remorse when she thought she had succeeded. The defendant didn't just want to divorce her husband. She wanted to erase him completely and profit from his death. She wanted to take his life, take his money, and take his son's father away from him. That's not the action of someone who deserves mercy. That's the action of someone who has forfeited the right to walk free in our society. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 6 months later, Holden sat in the courtroom for Renee's sentencing hearing. She had lost weight during her time in jail, and her once perfect appearance had deteriorated into something gray and defeated. But her eyes still held the same cold calculation he remembered from their marriage. Wyatt had written a victim impact statement that he read to the court. Your Honor, the woman sitting at that table was my mother for 14 years. She cooked my meals, helped me with homework, and tucked me into bed at night. But she was also planning to kill my father and make me an orphan for money. I don't understand how someone can love a child and hate the child's father so much that they're willing to destroy both their lives. I don't understand how someone can plan a murder while living in the same house as their intended victim. I don't understand how someone can be so selfish that they would rather see their family destroyed than admit they made a mistake. My mother chose money over love. She chose murder over divorce. She chose to be a criminal instead of just being honest about what she wanted. Those choices hurt me, but they also revealed who she really is. She's not the woman who raised me. She's a stranger who was pretending to be my mother. I hope the court sentences her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not because I hate her, but because she's dangerous. She's proven that she'll kill anyone who stands between her and what she wants. The only way to protect innocent people is to make sure she never gets the chance to hurt anyone else. When it was Holden's turn to speak, he stood and faced his wife directly. 20 years ago, I promised to love, honor, and cherish you for the rest of my life. I kept that promise even when you stopped loving me. I kept that promise even when you started planning my death. I kept that promise right up until the moment you tried to blow me up in a parking lot. You had choices, Renee. You could have asked for a divorce. You could have been honest about your feelings. You could have left with dignity and started over somewhere else. Instead, you chose to become a murderer. You chose to make our son complicit in your crime by using his trust to gather information about me. You chose to destroy our family rather than simply leaving it. I want you to spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about those choices. I want you to remember that you had every opportunity to do the right thing, and you chose evil instead. I want you to understand that your son will grow up knowing that his mother cared more about money than she cared about his happiness. You plan to erase me from this world, but instead you've erased yourself. My son and I will build a new life without you, and we'll be better off for it. You'll spend the next 30 years in a cell, forgotten by everyone who ever claimed to love you. I hope it was worth it. The judge sentenced Renee to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the murder conspiracy charges, plus an additional 20 years for insurance fraud. Griff received 25 years in exchange for his cooperation. The bailiffs led Renee away in shackles. She turned to look at Holden one last time. Her expression was unreadable, part anger, part regret, part something that might have been recognition of what she had lost. Holden stared back at her without emotion. The woman he had married was long gone, if she had ever existed at all. What remained was just a criminal in an orange jumpsuit, paying the price for choices that had destroyed everything good in her life. 18 months later, Holden stood behind the backstop at a baseball field in Chattanooga, Tennessee, watching Wyatt round third base on a clean double to left field. The boy had grown 3 inches since they'd moved, and his swing had improved dramatically under the guidance of his new coach. Their life in Tennessee was simple but satisfying. Holden had sold his Atlanta HVAC business and used the money to start over in Chattanooga under a new company name. The work was the same, fixing air conditioners and heating systems, but the customers were different. People who didn't know about his past, who saw him simply as a reliable contractor who showed up on time and did quality work. Wyatt was thriving in his new school. He made friends quickly and had joined both the baseball team and the debate club. The nightmares about his mother had faded, replaced by the normal concerns of a 15-year-old boy, girls, grades, and whether he'd make varsity next year. They live in a modest house on the outskirts of town, close enough to the city for Holden's work, but far enough out to have some privacy. The neighbors were friendly, but not intrusive. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business and judged you by your actions rather than your history. "Dad, did you see that hit?" Wyatt called out as he jogged back to the dugout. "I saw it. Nice piece of hitting. Coach says I might be ready for varsity next season. We'll see. Keep working on that curveball recognition." Holden smiled as his son rejoined his teammates. The kid was resilient in a way that amazed him. He'd lost his mother to betrayal and violence, but he'd somehow managed to maintain his basic decency and optimism. That was something Renee had never been able to touch or corrupt. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marlene. Saw the news article about Renee's appeal being denied. "How are you feeling?" Holden typed back, "Fine. Justice was served. Time to move on." And that was the truth. He felt no satisfaction in knowing that his ex-wife was spending her days in a maximum security prison. He felt no joy in the knowledge that she would likely die behind bars. He simply felt finished. The account had been settled. The debt had been paid. The game ended with Wyatt's team winning 7-4. As they walked to the parking lot, Wyatt asked the question that Holden had been expecting for months. "Do you ever think about her?" "Sometimes. Do you miss her?" Holden considered the question carefully. "I miss the person I thought she was. But that person never really existed. The woman I married was playing a role, pretending to be someone she wasn't. When I think about it that way, there's nothing to miss." "Do you think she misses us?" "I think she misses the life she gave up when she chose money over family. But I don't think she misses us specifically. I think she misses the security and comfort we provided." They reached Holden's new truck, a used Ford that ran well and didn't attract attention. As they got in, Wyatt asked one more question. "Are you ever going to get married again?" "Maybe someday. If I meet someone who's honest and trustworthy. Someone who values family over money." "What would you look for in a person like that?" Holden started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. "I look for someone who keeps their promises. Someone who handles problems by talking about them instead of plotting to make them disappear. Someone who understands that real love means wanting what's best for the other person, even when it's inconvenient." "Think you'll find someone like that?" "I hope so. But if I don't, that's okay too. We're doing fine on our own." And they were. For the first time in years, Holden felt genuinely optimistic about the future. He and Wyatt had survived betrayal, violence, and the complete destruction of their family. They'd emerged stronger and closer than ever. As they drove home through the Tennessee hills, Holden reflected on the lessons he'd learned. Trust was precious and fragile. Loyalty was rare and valuable. Family was what you made it, not what you inherited. Most importantly, he learned that sometimes the best revenge wasn't active retaliation. Sometimes the best revenge was simply building a better life and letting your enemies destroy themselves with their own choices. Renee had tried to erase him from the world, but instead she had erased herself. She'd traded everything good in her life for money she would never get to spend. She'd chosen isolation over family, prison over freedom, hatred over love. Holden had chosen differently. He'd chosen his son over his anger. He'd chosen truth over vengeance. He'd chosen to build rather than destroy. In the end, that choice had made all the difference.